Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Thomas Cassidy, and I want to welcome you to the third Words Across the Water of this semester. It's the seventh one of this academic year, and I think it's the 11th in the last year and a half. Words Across the Water was the brainchild of Dr. Allison McCletchie, and it grew out of a project that she, I, and Dr. Frank Martin had collaborated on the previous semester, where we had planned a series of poetry events, which all ended up having to be online because of the pandemic. Making an opportunity out of necessity, we decided, or Dr. McCletchie had the idea, so let's make this a regular thing. So she put in a grant for Words Across the Water. It was approved. And the next semester, I put in a grant for Words Across the Water, and then this semester again. So I want to welcome everybody. Many of you are here as returning guests, and that's what makes this so special to me, to Frank, and to Allison. Our first poet tonight has actually been a guest on several of these events, and she had to miss the one we did back in February, and she emailed me immediately thereafter asking for the link to the video. We usually post these on Facebook thereafter. And I responded, thank you. Hey, I see you're a poet. Would you consider being a part of our next event? And a few weeks later, a few months later, really, here we are. So Nancy Miller, thank you for joining us. Frank will give a more formal introduction later on. And Dr. Bettina Judd is also a poet who I've long wanted to get her voice on the South Carolina State University campus. About 2.5 years ago, I was at a conference where the keynote speaker was the great Tasha Trethewey. She saw that I was from South Carolina State University. I had asked her some question, as one does, and she said, you know, if you're from South Carolina, you probably know about that Sims Memorial. As a poet, you really need to get to come speak to you. Tina Judd, you need to buy her book, Patient Poems. And so I did, and here we are tonight. So I want to thank each of you. Dr. Frank Martin is in the midst of, I was going to say probably the most busy month of his career here at SAPE, but what do I know? But he's been incredibly busy because this is an event that is part of a new arts festival that we are trying to, well, Frank is inaugurating the Rose Twigs Art Festival. Frank is also the director of the IP Standback Museum and Planetarium, which is a co-sponsor of this event. And one of the most interesting people I know, no offense, Allison, no offense, Mary, my wife, if she's out there. But without further ado, let me turn the floor over to your host for this evening, Dr. Frank Martin.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm going to share my screen. I have a brief PowerPoint, and I will introduce our special guests. So. Of course, our series is Words Across the Water. As Dr. Cassidy pointed out, it was a grant that was brought to our attention by Dr. Allison McCletchie, who is acting as our sort of navigator through this project. She's our timekeeper and our person who keeps us on track. She's also the former student of both Dr. Cassidy and myself, so now she's a colleague. But the idea was conceived as looking at works from the African diaspora, the Anglophone African diaspora. And in that sense, the museum was included because, of course, our collections include African and African-American art. And so we thought it would be a natural to conceptualize this project together. And I think I hashed out part of the concept, and then Tom and Allison confirmed some of the things I was saying. And today we're here with two wonderful poets, Nancy Ann Miller, and Dr. Bettina Judd. And the program is presented in part by the Department of English and Communications at South Carolina State University and the Department of Social Sciences in tandem with the museum. And it is a component of, and one of the culminating activities of the Twigs Rose Festival of the Arts, which we began on April 4th. So it's been a month-long celebration of the fine arts in Orangeburg. And the grant is provided by the South Carolina Humanities, which is a re-granting organization through the National Endowment for the Humanities. And Dr. McCletchie and Dr. Cassidy have both quite judiciously continued to seek funding for this project. So, as I mentioned, the Department of English and Communications and Department of Social Sciences are co-sponsors for this event. And it is a part of the Twigs Rose Festival of the Arts in Orangeburg County, a celebration of our local HBCUs and of our higher educational institutions locally. And it's supported in part by the Orangeburg County Library and Conference Center, the Orangeburg County Council, and the generosity of Sydney and Jacqueline Fulton. This is the IP Stanback Museum where I work. And it was my reintroduction to South Carolina. I left to attend college and I came back to work in this museum, first as its curator and now as its director. And it's a wonderful facility that has extensive exhibition spaces. This is still from an exhibition that I co-created with Janelle Logan called Epiphanies, regarding how works of art can often help us have sudden insights into experience. And certainly poetry is exactly that. It is structuring language and sound to give us a sudden understanding of or insight into experience. And certainly both poets tonight will be some of the best embodiments of that idea. And in our collection, we collect African and African-American art or art from the African diaspora, but we are able to show in the exhibition space works from many different cultures from all around the world. That was an image of the Eri Beji Yoruba twin figures in our collection. We also have an extensive collection of photographs, both civil rights photographs, local civil rights history, and works like these stills from Harlem on My Mind, which was an extensive photographic exhibition installed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1969. And we acquired these from the Schomburg Institute for Research in Black Culture. And among the prizes are these two large panels, 8 feet tall and approximately 8 feet wide by James Van Der Zee, as well as some beautiful works. One, such as this portrait of Langston Hughes as a student at Lincoln University, is one of the prizes in the collection. And of course, our program is based on the ideas expressed by our guests, and the guests are not representatives of South Carolina State University or any of the associated institutions, but these opinions that they will present are their own carefully considered expert opinions and ideas, and they are experts in their respective fields, and they're speaking here as individuals and not necessarily as institutional representatives. With that said, I'm going to turn off my camera while I'm reading the introductions. So our first guest is Nancy Ann Miller, who is a Bermudian poet who has published 9 collections of her works. Latitude and Longitude is her latest, from Kelsey Books, published in 2021. She's also published internationally in such journals as Edinburgh Review, Poetry Ireland Review, The Moth, Salzburg Review, Agenda, Stand, Magma, Ambit, The Fiddlehead, and the International Literary Quarterly and the Caribbean Writer. Ms. Miller holds a Master of Letters degree in creative writing from the University of Glasgow. She is a MacDowell Fellow and a Bermuda Arts Council grant recipient. She organized the Bermused poetry reading for Bermuda's 400th anniversary in 2009. Her visual artworks, her visual arts background facilitates her use of image metaphor in her works, in which she seeks to, quote, feminize language by having the poem radiate many meanings throughout the page by the circular movement of comparisons an image metaphor provides. Her intention is thereby to deconstruct linear intentional thought or what writer Virginia Woolf called the masculine sentence, and prevent the poem's resolution in one climactic ending. And our second special guest is Dr. Bettina Judd, who is an interdisciplinary writer, artist, and performer whose research focus is centered upon Black women's creative production and use of visual art, literature, and music to develop feminist thought. Her current book manuscript argues that Black women's creative production is feminist knowledge production generated by registers of affect, which she terms feeling. And I suspect she'll expand on that idea. She's a recipient of the Consortial Five Colleges Fellowship for Minority Scholars. The five colleges are Amherst College, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke, Smith, and the University of Massachusetts, which collaborate to host a residency for minority doctoral students in the process of completing the dissertation. The Vermont Studio Center and the University of Maryland have also offered her fellowships, and she is a Cave Canem Fellow and has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize in Poetry. Her poems have appeared in publications such as Torch, Mythium, Meridians, and other journals and anthologies. And her collection of poems entitled Patient was released in 2014 and won the Black Lawrence Press Hudson Book Prize. This is a group of poetic works that tackle the history of medical experimentation upon and display of African descended and Black women. Patient, as I said, won the Black Lawrence Press Hudson Book Prize. So with that, I think that the program will proceed by having a reading first from Nancy Ann Miller and perhaps some discussion, and then a reading from Dr. Judd. And of course, we may have commentary by Dr. Cassidy and our co-host, Dr. Allison McCletchie. So with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Nancy Ann Miller.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It's always a wonderful exercise to go through one's work with a theme. It's to give it a kind of a new perspective. So when I was given the theme of poetry and song, what immediately came up was the sound of the island and sounds. So I would like to begin with a rather famous quote from The Tempest about island sounds. Be not afraid. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that if I then had waked after long sleep will make me sleep again. And then in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again. When I think of the island, Bermuda, and sound, I immediately think of the ocean. The repetitive sound, the crescendo, and then the refrain. As an islander, that has informed every aspect of my writing. This poem is about that dominance of the ocean in my poetry. Conch. The ocean has made a sculpture of turning, carved the spiral, the journey of sound into air, the line of the tide's deep roar, white-tipped as the lip of a wave, the sea's mouth foams. Working with that image of the sea mouth foams, I wrote a couple of poems about the sea speaking and what it would say. The sea speaks. I love to somersault in, over and over, a roll of bubble wrap unravels. Did you know a wave is a tube? A pea shooter can spit a surfer out. I love to play my tricks. Tied a white handkerchief makes the horizon line just disappear. A magician's skill, which hypnotizes tourists, beachcombers. My favorite is to bow down to them, then exit. It makes them run to me each time. See the Rolex file I am of places, waves, not here, but always there, so quickly. My tide moves, an escalator you can't climb, ever get to the top, though you tread. A revolving door towards and from the horizon. I make you decide to remain on land. I take your tracks with me, fill them up with water, like a sinking boat. I speak with many tongues, one wave of sound over the other, deep-throated. Tips touch gums of pink sand. I litter the beach with old teeth, bivalve shells, sharpen my speech, tame it. The surf's printer churns out my story, makes a bather's torso thumb the paperback tide, imprint each foamy page. Look out at the exclamation point, the deep subtext, a surfacing whale spout. The reef's rant. I protect the island. I make the sea express itself, a harmonica to play through. White lace foams out, a collar around my crags. Cow pollies, breams, jacks tickle me at night with fins and gulping water. I eat a few ships, watch divers crawl like one-eyed insects over the remains. I slice a toe off a swimmer, watch their blood ignite the sea, bright as a struck match. See a shark come in fast, a bull drawn to a red cape. I grow fauna, coral, plankton without names. My dark ink spills into the aquamarine blue. will never form into a clear language. Bermuda is almost 700 miles out at sea. It's 22 miles by possibly 2 miles at the widest. So the sea is always with you. And as a result of hearing it, seeing it, and it's wooing you to it, you have a sense of belonging to it. This and the next poem are about that. Somersault. It must be that we are drawn back to the ocean because waves rise like days in their own definition before becoming flat, one with the sea. I'm sure it is how we remember a specific moment before it curls into all times or becomes scattered as a net of spray pulling in the new. Or is it because we drifted into the world feet fin-like, practicing the somersaults we will do to keep afloat, but with a safety rope still intact? Most islanders feel wherever they live, the States or England, as if their island is their true home. I now live in America and have a home here, but island is always home. And that also has to do with a belonging to the ocean. Home is what the poets from the Caribbean, Anguilla, Barbados, and Jamaica called their island, which is what Bermuda is for me, although I live stateside. Because I learned the female's frilly strength in the tides of waves, which repeatedly scroll into the sea's backbone, white and narrow, skeletal as unwrapped bones on our archaeological dig, but also alive, bending with the undertow shifts, where I learned life's pace from the speed of jellyfish, flapping like a bird in the sea's sky, with no landing, no touchdown place, all itself in the haloed petticoats of moments, like mass billowing, full of a home, the journey of myself to an isle in a turquoise ocean. The other dominant sound that I associate with Bermuda is the sound of how Bermudians speak amongst themselves, which can include dialect. Dialect is seen as a national treasure to be used by all. And the next poems reference that. Sun tongue. Sun, low language. Language where the sun sets below a spoken horizon, pulling all sense into a resonance deep and unending. Sun, low language, where each sound is a ripened fruit pressed through a syllable sieve, made juicy and runny. Sun, low language, where the sentence is heat stopped, words flow back into the throat, a dark river of shade, cooling the body down. The next poem is about the influence of the environment on how Bermudians speak. Nothing. Nothing grows in a straight line here. Oleander boughs curl, wriggle flowers like painted pink toes for tourists. Cacti flail thorny branches over stone walls, the way octopi renege the nearby presence of a gadabout summer swimmer. Standard English won't grow vertical in the Stonehenge temple of teeth, drops an octave, swoons like seagrass in a tide, scatters tongues on the beach in shells, tell of the in, out of ocean. Tiny scallop shovels which dig deep. I turn brown as the earth below me. My accent a thick shade. Skin peels, a need to be dressed, undressed by the sun. Whenever I talk with my family or with friends who have grown up in Bermuda but now live stateside or in England, we immediately talk Bermudian or go into the accent and the dialect. And this is about that. Phone cord. The phone may as well be a small pillow we rest our head on. One from the nursery where our wooden horse Doblin rocked us like waves. It may as well be a conch from off the beach, where the echoes of the ocean carry us, connect us to home. The sound of water coming in and out as voice patterns rise in a high tide or ebb as we speak amongst ourselves. Talk Bermudian. The sea's slow surge is a hand kneading my past, my present into one rhythm, which resides in my family news, trailing through the phone cord, binds us together. A long, slack skipping rope we twirl, while each one takes their turn. The last poem I'm going to read is the title of my next manuscript, Pink Typewriter, and it's to honor the influence of the island on my writing and also being a woman on my writing. Pink Typewriter. You sweet me Locals say to one another, like dialect sweetens me, nation, natal language, returns me to honey sound days. My typewriter, the color pink of Dunkley Dairy's strawberry ice cream, fairy cotton candy, with alphabet keys held inside a metal frame, like a mouth full of sugar cubes, helps to write the sun-tongue swoon of childhood days. My fingers, chubby as overweight legs on a gym stairs machine, have to strike down hard. Each rung rises like a scythe ready to cut cane. Letters on a poem's page, ants on a wall in a humid Bermuda kitchen, trailing towards Crow Lane Bakery banana bread, left on the counter to cool. Sheets of paper pour from the Royal Classic carriage, roll out like slabs of sticky icing for white coconut cake, porous as the island's limestone. One other thing I would like to say about sounds in poetry and song. I'm a very image-driven poet. I collect image metaphors in a notebook like an artist collects sketches. And I use the 2 points of comparison in an image metaphor, like rubbing sticks together to start the fire of the poem. However, sound is my editor. If I read through my work and something is stuck, not harmonious, then the context literally is out of tune. So with, all respect to song, I would like to say that sound is my final editor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nancy Miller. Brilliant, beautiful work. I heard so many beautiful phrases. This idea of the swooning seagrass, the rhythmic image it brought forward. And so when we come back, I will be asking you a lot of questions about this connection between the visual and the vocal in your work. It's
Yes, good.
extraordinary. It's very striking. But first we're going to hear, and where your work is so concerned with place, we'll be hearing, I think, now from Dr. Judd, and I think her work is going to be very concerned with the body. So
Good.
Dr.
Hey.
Bettina Judd, yes. Dr. Bettina Judd, we're anxious to hear your
Yes.
collections. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. Interestingly enough, like I when I was given this prompt of thinking about poetry through sound, and the connection to sound and song, I actually those feature greatly in my work as a kind of practice. When I'm writing and in the processes of revision, hearing it out loud for me is key. And so hearing the song of a line is really important to my writing. And then sometimes some poems become songs for other poems. So in obverse to the work that I do in Patient, that is more so about the body, I want to start with a poem that is about place. It's called Where You From? And it's featured in this book about, it's an anthology by the Fog Lifter Journal, Home is Where You Queer Your Heart. And I created a video poem for it. The scene is actually of a short like video clip. It wasn't even a full video clip. It was a live photo, if you're familiar with iPhones, that I took on a trip to South Carolina. Um, and I was a part of the faculty of a workshop called the Watering Hole. And it met at that time. It still meets. It's based in South Carolina. And so um, it has in it a refrain, a song behind it that is a poem that was published in Meridians years ago, like in 2012. Um, and the poem is, "You say I belong not to this, nor to that, but the sea, but I cannot swim." And that's the poem. But it became a song for this new poem at the time that asked the question, "Where are you from?" And so I'd like to share it with you to start. Shell of snail in the soil, where my feet first land. Swamp skin, mother tongue, coils in my mouth. We call it catching ghosts. A glossolalia felt good to utter. Not know, but know it meant something. That means something. Don't it make you wonder why your dreams steal away at night? Magic is reinvented every generation, you know. Got to kill a thing so it can grow. Water people die on dry land if they don't move. Where I'm from is complicated. I say here and I'm bound to be corrected. Every word lifts an oar. Sometimes I say nowhere and again corrected. Y no tengo más idiomas por alejamiento. Nadie in my family understands why I move, and I don't understand how they can't. Magic is reinvented every generation, you know. Got to kill a thing so it can grow. If groundlessness is sustainable, I will learn to fly, to swim in quicksand. Aunt Kate calls the center of the earth. Wells are all I remember of that land where we used to drink the groundwater and find arrowheads. All this mud is a war. Unmarked graves remain. Further south, I prayed. Wind and still waters answered in another religion. No, not that one. I'm sure this time. Magic is reinvented every generation, you know. Got to kill a thing so it can grow. The tongues in my mouth, the ridges on my fingertips, ache for old worlds gone, ache for gone worlds new. And I think I'll actually continue with some video poems that incorporate song. This next one is featured in an essay or an article that I published in 2019 on Black women's anger. And I was thinking about Sandra Bland and how her anger was read upon her as a kind of violent thing before, but both before and after her death, and kind of the real vulnerability of being like in one place. Like I drive all the time and my mind is in a place and I'm singing along, and then to be kind of moved out of the space of your own mind in injected in someone's other reality, and that reality has the power to end your life. And so this video it follows the route that I used to take home to and from work. And I called I had just moved to Seattle, to the land of the Duwamish people, where I currently am now. And I liked this route because it had few stop signs. It was scenic and beautiful. It was alongside Lake Washington. And there were also like no police. And it was this really kind of like my own discomforts that come up when I'm in this heavily traffic and surveilled area, kind of that. At least going to and from work, I can have a little less of that. And so once I played this in a space in the community where a lot of local Black folks from Seattle were there, and they were like, yes, we know that exact route. So it wasn't even something that I'd asked local folks from. It was a way that like I ended up finding, and then it being confirmed amongst my people, like, yes, this is the way we tried, this is the way we learned to drive, this is the way we went home from the club, like this is the way we wanted safety too. And it's so interesting because it is through a kind of wealthier neighborhood, but it's without some of the mass traffic of the city, more towards the center of the city. And it too has a song that features. You're plowing through heartbreak, a cigarette between your fingers, the radio's bass beating into your sternum, a song in your throat. You feel watched. You pull over to avert, and the eyes pull over with you. You know that this happens. You know how this happens and why. You know that it has no name, cannot be named without a price. To call the officer out, to call the officer the police, to say a thing like, my rights. You'll be naming that which will invite your death. It will be you. It is not funny how he asked a question to which he knew the answer and yet didn't understand his own damn question. It is an old question. Discount your memory, and they will. But his answer to his question was, it feels like you will die very soon. On or about July 10th, 2015, you lived. Heartbreak, whether you like it or not, makes you woefully aware that you have a heart, that it is beating, that it beats in a chorus, and it is yours. You can live for the heart, even if perhaps because it is breaking, but you cannot live for him. So, on or about July 10th, 2015, you chose to live, which invited a very certain and undeniable death, so very certain that 3 days later they called it suicide, called you crazy, invoked a trope to make it all fall into sense, arrogant, uncooperative, belligerent, angry Black woman. And we knew, Sandra, that whatever your choices were, whatever hand wrapped a thing around your neck, we know that thing. Whomever witnessed your last breath, we know them as well. However you moved about your sadness, who would we be without sadness? We knew that you did not merely so happen to, in this particular instance, even though you may have any number of reasons to implode. That's never how it works. On or about July 10th to July 13th, 2015, at various points in time, you lived as electronic reverb, yourself surrounded by your fading self, and the vacuum of silence that is Black womanhood.
That I take it. It's all my fault that we faded away. What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to say is, will you run? Will you run?
Right. And this is Station 11, Tendons. It comes from a little period of, like, I was asked by my progressive Baptist UCC church to write a poem on one of the Stations of the Cross. And of course, I made it an exercise, and it ended up being a series of poems about violence and the Black body and sexual assault. And so this is Tendon's Station 11. And interestingly enough, to Thomas's story, I actually workshopped this poem with Natasha Trethewey early in its infancy. So Station 11, Tendons. Forgiving Father, not even I know what this is all of the time. How could we, flesh so vibrant? In paradise, there can be no thief. There can be no savior. No, I cannot save. Behold, woman, son, mother. Behold, son, mother, brother. Behold, flesh, flesh, spirit. Behold, spirit, spirit, spirit. Eli, Eli, if I sing Eli, Eli, in an ancient song, Eli, Eli, will you take Lama, Mihom Sabachthani? Nothing can be washed away with water, nothing quenched with wine. Go. I let go between triumph, go, defeat, go. Everything is here. No thing is here. Oh, home, home. Home. Oh, mm, home, home, mm, home, home. And I think I'll now like turn to some like a future project or a project that I've been working on for quite some time, but is still formulating as a book project. And it is not the next book that the text you were referring to, Dr. Martin, is feeling, and I can talk about that a little bit. Um, and Feeling will be coming out this December. I guess I should say that, through Northwestern University Press. But the project after that, right? Like in academia, we have to like you just finished like cracking your back after like breaking it, working on the first book, and they're like, "So when's the next one coming back?" It's like, okay, I have this project, and this poem is. The project is called Mitochondrial Eve, or at least the idea of Mitochondrial Eve, which is this kind of figure that was really produced through not just like anthropological biology, but also, or in the study of the human genome, but also through kind of news outlets and the kind of sensationalism that we're all related by this most recent common ancestor. And they named her Eve, to connect it to this kind of biblical figure. But then, and then also she's of course from sub-Saharan Africa. So there's this whole discourse around her. And I was thinking about the idea of a mitochondrial Eve, and how hard it must have been to live, period, to survive, to find food, to ward off disease, to weather the environment early in human life, and still be like, you know what? I'm gonna make more babies. Like I'm gonna make more beings. And I think this is a kind of existential question probably most of humanity has had at every point in time. But I think also right now is one of those questions like, oh, the there is nothing but disaster in terms of our environment that's coming out. I'm not too sure about the stability of our democracies globally. Do I want to have children? And this is also a question then, of course, I can think as a person who is descended from enslaved people, why would I want to have a child? And how do I get into the running of being possibly a mitochondrial Eve? Because mitochondrial Eve will shift over time. So this is Laura, mitochondrial Eve, and Laura is my grandmother. According to science, grandmothers hold the promise of 2 generations, her own child and the eggs of her not yet grandchildren, which means in the late month of 1951 and the earliest months of 1952, you held my mother, who held me, if not as an idea, then as a fact. It wouldn't be the first time, mother of mothers, you held a thought before flesh could form it alive. You, poet laureate of my heart, gave me words before I knew sound. Every dream for us carefully winked, charted and documented in notebooks on the backs of envelopes, a graduation, a new job, the first of yet another generation. Every celebration, a newly minted song, every equation of our needs penciled and solved, every terror pressed out by the hollow bend in your knees. What sliver of paper would hold our day of ghostly hearts? Which one of us will wave goodbye from our earth porch as you sail away from us? We hold each other, feeling for our flesh inheritance, our spirit heirlooms, and come up wanting more than the you in ourselves. According to science, grandmothers carry the promise of 2 generations, holding and then carefully and firstly breathing, pushing, letting go. I think now I'll read, and I think from Patience, a few of the poems um, that deal with song. And I think it's so interesting too for the theme, not just the theme of song, but that so often in pulling some of these poems about song, water like emergence as a kind of co-theme as well. Like it's interesting to see. I think Nancy was also mentioning like what it happens when you focus on one aspect or one thematic in your poetry, and then it brings along this other thing with it. So in the book Patient, I do look at the kind of history of medical experimentation and exploitation of Black women, mainly in slavery, but then the kind of longue durée, right? Like the effects of some of these approaches to the questions of what a human is and to medicine that were kind of nascent in the era of slavery, and affect how we think about medicine and bodies today. And so one of the figures that I talk about is a woman by the name of Joyce Heth, who was P.T. Barnum of Barnum and Bailey Circus, his first sideshow. And he purported that Joyce Heth was 161 years old, that she was the wet nurse to George Washington. And of course, that was not true. But, nevertheless, she was, this was, the reason for her being a sideshow. And she was mainly for P.T. Barnum, a sideshow in the North. That's where he got his fame. And this, though he owed a bill of sale for her, he couched this show as a kind of abolitionist project. And so a part of her show was that she came with a little pamphlet that told the story of her life, how she was enslaved in Madagascar. And I mean, I could go on about what the pamphlet said, but it was lies, of course. Like it was a show. But I took some of these these lies into question. And so I have a poem that is a song, or that could be sung, that is very song-like. Let me say it like that. It's called Benediction in Providence. And there's an epigraph that says, that's from the New York Baptist. This was an abolitionist newspaper at the time, that says, at the close of the service, the old lady, Joyce Heth, commenced in an antiquated hymn. I am the map unfurling, yet I am at home between the teeth of the beast. Priest-ridden saints partake, touch their hearts, eyes to the sky. I have never been religious, but truth is as clear as a cannibal's smile. Oh, tearing bicuspids. Oh, hull of this terrible ship. Oh, my misdirection. This is the way you feed them, heart first. They'll forget the rest. They pronounce it antique, cured meat, an abolitionist feast. Muddy baptismal waters drink for them, the virtue of shame. Oh, lost Moses. Oh, greatest show. Oh, my tender flesh. Dawn. I think I will end with a poem that I think connects some of the ideas around the waters. it wanted to have the epigraph from Walcott, but it's after Walcott's of the sea is history, and it invokes or it's about our now in relationship to science and Henrietta Lacks. So this is Of Air and Sea for Henrietta Lacks after Walcott. I have almost died 4 times. First in the womb, suffocating on the idea. Twice nearly drowned, once at Mount Sinai, lungs failing, chest compressing, extending. You were the science so that I would not. You on that last bed, you in tubes, growing all around. Had I known, I would have wept. I would not have thought of death, of myself. Had not an autopsy, a fistula, your cells. What lives would be uncradled? What discoveries never proclaimed? What bodies left between here and oblivion? All encompassing blue, vast open coffin of air and sea. I am thankful for medicine, the way it cradles, kills. Death isn't careless. Breathing, even if difficult, is air. Air, not salt water, not yet. I do not want to be responsible for the retelling. There's no returning to mother's dreamless sleep, no heritage cruise, only forward through the mind's backward gaze. When there may be some chance of forgetting, mind veers off to the waves. You are memory. You are everything. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Yes. Well, I know there are already questions. I know I have 1,000 questions. And I was thinking of Henrietta Lacks when you mentioned the experimentation and extended into the 20th century from the abuse of women's bodies in the 19th century by people like J. Marion Sims. And we may come back to that. But this uniting of the two bodies of work through water, which is often cited as a feminine symbol and is the life-giving force. And so this idea of the mitochondrial Eve, the life-giving mother of humankind, yes, exactly, this East African woman who, what was she, they say now she's what, 3 million years old, 1 million years old? Yeah, we don't know, but her daughters are all the branches of humanity, all the branches of modern humanity. So with that in mind, I know Dr. McLetchie wants to jump right in, but I was thinking about in both of your works, this relation between the visual and the verbal. And I must tell you, the poem with the video going backward was very striking. So that adding a level of technology that amplifies the expressiveness was extraordinary for me. I really felt all of that. And what made you decide to show that journey for Sandra Bland in reverse, as if undoing that damage that was going to be? Could you just talk about that a little bit, and then we'll ask a question of Nancy Miller, please.
Yeah, I think, there was a thought for me in making the video poem that I could use the original footage, but the original footage of Sandra Bland's encounter with the police officer, the dash cam footage was so something else for me. And I wanted it, the poem's not in Sandra Bland's voice. It's in my voice. It's in like a person who's like watching this happen and is like, oh, I can see this happening to me. And I've been in a car, and I've been in a car driving. I don't smoke cigarettes, but I can imagine like like her smoking a cigarette, her, singing along to the radio. And folks said that she had just had a miscarriage, and so she had a sad, like she'd been struggling with that sadness. And I've definitely sat in my car singing, struggling with sadness, and then here comes somebody interrupting my stuff, like even if my stuff is sad, it's mine. My feelings, or if they're sad or not pleasant, they're my feelings, I don't need yours. And so, like, the dash cam footage is from the position of that police officer, right? And so, um, I thought that, thinking about it, because of the voice of the poem, and because this is now something that I'm thinking of as someone who is like her,
Mm,
um, new to an area, like she was just coming to this area for a job,
that's right.
right?
Yeah.
Navigating the area, like all of, like, this could be my journey. And so putting it backwards is, in between. I was actually driving home, so it's in between driving to work and driving home, and the kind of reflection of that. Like, what if we thought about this in reverse?
Well, I was really enjoying that added element of expressivity that the visual created with the verbal. And Nancy's work is doing some of the same similar kinds of visual verbal combinations. And I keep thinking this image of the sea as this source of life, and also all this debris, but also the idea of an open vista where you can see everything. And Nancy, in how you were looking at the world and experiencing it, could you just talk a little bit for a second before we open up to the audience, because I know they're waiting to get in here, about how the sea and this idea of absence and the loss of your island, well, not the loss of the island culture, but a kind of devotion to something that is no longer present, accepting your experience in your mind. Could you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll open the audience, the questions for the audience. Oops, you got to unmute.
Thank you. When I connect or to the island, either in my writing or my painting, the predominant force that comes up is the sea. And I really think it has to do with early body memory, swimming in the ocean, at a very young age, and being aware that this force where I could float and just have this lovely sense of my being, was also a very dangerous place, undertows and so forth, but also predators, barracuda, had to take off anything that was shiny. There were people who, were attacked by sharks. And so this phenomena that, gave you a sense of your being, a sense of lightness, was also strong, dangerous, mysterious, bigger than anything, and joined all countries. So it's and not to mention there are, in my history, there are boats that were lost at sea, family lost, and so forth. And so this idea of pleasure, and sustenance, and danger, and particularly now, during climate change, where if you're a wee island, the impending force of that. So there, in terms of subject matter, it's unending. It's just forever. I'll I'll always be hearing the ocean. I'll always be remembering the ocean. And I'll always be honoring the ocean. And yes, it's a feminine force. The poem Somersault is about water and being in water and turning, and the umbilical cord, kind of being a safety tie to something. And yet in life, we don't quite have that cord, but so reverence to the ocean, reverence to it as a feminine force.
Well, I was really struck also by your use of the images of foam and that image you had of the toe sliced off. And the foam came to mind because of the very famous picture of the birth of Venus, which
Yes.
the term Aphrodite is given from Aphroditos. So that was, the images in all the poems really just were incredibly striking. I'd like to try to open this. I see Sequoia Manor made a comment. She was so moved by the entire poem referring to Dr. Judd's, especially the ending of which she was singing along with the jam in an ordinary day, your precarious but hopeful survival, and the everydayness of it. And both groups of poems have something about that precariousness of life, precariousness of survival. So can we open the discussion? Dr. McCletchie, did you want to offer your questions?
I don't know if it's a question so much, but I wanted to say first to Nancy, this idea of the sea, even as someone like myself who's from the islands, I'm not a sea person, right? I'm a beach person. I need to sit on the beach. I need to feel that sun. But the idea of home and connecting to sound. So when there is a thunderstorm, I have to sit on the front porch. I have to look at my tree, in the front of the house. I wake up every morning to birds, and sometimes they're so loud. It is unimaginable how loud they are. And so I wanted to say that there's that. And then of course, when you talked about how we use language, right? So I'm speaking standardized English here, but you're right. When we get together, sometimes very often people ask, is that English? Yes, it is. You just not meant for you to understand. So shut up and go to your corner, right? And so there's that. But I wanted to also say to Dr. Judd, this thing, and I had to get a pen and paper and start to write down, right? So there was a line in the first poem, got to kill a thing so it can grow again.
Yes.
Right? And I kept coming back to that. And then of course, I'm looking at one of my favorite theologians in the room, Gloria Bertrand. And I'm thinking about this, there was a lot of kind of Christian motifs in your work. And my head is on the Stations Across because of course Lent is finished and Frank and I are trying to do something for a project we're working on. But this idea of you've got to kill a thing so it can grow, because I was thinking about this idea of Christian love. And we say that, right? What is the greatest thing that someone can do but to lay down their life? But then there are other things that we kill in the name of growth that bother me, right? So we kill the joy of children, right? Because we say they have to grow up, stop living in a fantasy land, whatever it is, right? We very often beat that out of them. And then Frank, Tom, and I get them as undergraduates, and we're like, no, you have to, use your imagination. And it's like, we're developing these schizophrenic people. We killed the enslaved and the native and the indentured in the name of building an economy, right? And we're doing the same with the environment, right? And so that kind of embodies to me, you know, Western civilization, right? This kind of, I don't know, it's really problematic. So I just wanted to say, you make me do some homework tonight. You both did. Thank you.
I also love the idea of patience. When there was a line in Patience where it said, why am I patient? Dr. Judd, you didn't say that was not something you read today, but I was reading that and I was thinking about this double use of the term as both a verb and a noun, and the state of being patient. So Sandra Bland was not patient. She was impatient with the interruption in her life because there was no real cause for that interruption. And of course, she was someone who needed support. And in that way, the society is like the ocean because the ocean buoys you up. But as Nancy said, there's this undertow. There are all the things beneath the surface, the stinging jellyfish, the poison angel, you know, all these things that will kill you. And I guess life is like that. So when you ask that question about bringing more life into the world, the question following was your grandmother Laura. I guess that's an issue that women, well, and men too, I suppose, but women in that role of, 9 months are committed to bringing forth that life. And whether we accept it or not, just the physical character of what a woman must bear is so different from a man that this embodiment is a shifting or a shaping thing for our experience. And so does that have anything to do with some of what you're writing? I'll leave it there. And then I'm going to ask some others to jump in, and you can raise your hands, and Dr. McCletchie can recognize people because I can't see everyone right now. Dr. Judd.
Yeah, I guess I was also responding to Ms. Bertrand's comments about that poem. Yeah, I think a lot about, I'm thinking a lot about it for me as, someone who is in the age where folks would call a pregnancy a geriatric pregnancy, right? So it's like that ticking time bomb of like, are you gonna have a baby? And it's like, I would like to, but then I look around, would I like to? Like,
Why?
it's a global pandemic, like political, like there's war, there's the threat of nuclear Armageddon. Like there's just so many things. What do I want to do? Do I want to do this? And I think about, I come from a long line of, like I can, trace a lot of names to the 18th century, which I know isn't a lot for a lot of people, but I think for folks of African descent who are descendants of slave, that's a major thing. And they at some point said yes, and kept saying yes, because as we know through stories of women like Margaret Garner, there's a point where you can say no.
Yeah.
And so
but Margaret Garner was double because she escaped, and
right.
she was creating a new vista for herself, and this evil came to her to steal what she had created for herself, and that's when she said, oh no. Yeah.
Right. And so and took that like existential kind of, sometimes we to call it a comedic threat. I put you in this world, I'll take you out, when she did it, presumably out of incredible love. Like,
yes.
I don't want my children to have this. I don't want this for myself. I do not want this especially for my children. And there were folks who kept saying yes. Like what kind of altruism? Maybe I'd like to think of it as an extreme sense of altruism that is involved in that, and then also a kind of like primal necessity. Like a primal thing that is
that whole idea of sacrifice. Yeah.
that too.
Because I'm thinking again of that myth. So in the Abrahamic religion, with the Old Testament and the Bible, Abraham is going to sacrifice his son Isaac, and the Greek counterpart was that Kronos sacrifices his father Uranos. And so I'm not aware of the African equivalent, but I'm sure that there's something with Shango and the Yoruba tradition of an inversion, or I'll have to research that to find out where that sacrifice image and continuity, the killing something to make it live idea continues on. But were there any questions from our audience members? Any raised hands? Or Nancy, did you have anything else you wanted to?
Nobody's hand is raised, but maybe Gloria, you could unmute and say what you wanted to say.
Hi, I am
Hi.
so touched. Hi, I am. I really was very touched by Dr. Judd's poems. It's not just the words; it's the voice. It's the whole. My grandmother was born in 1878, and she was Spanish and Carib, married an African man. So I tell people I come from the earth because I come from the land. And when I was a child, they always said to me, "You're just like your grandmother." I didn't understand it. Now that I'm 88 years old, but I began to understand it some time ago. All her habits, without realizing it, I have somehow taken in all of that, all those basic things that Ma, as we called her, did and taught. And I am seeing the same pattern. I have some granddaughters, very professional young women, but they also like that part of me. And they write, and I do write some poetry. I don't say I'm a poet. I haven't reached to that kind of place yet, but I do write some poetry. And I wrote one about, I call it Revelation. I had a friend who was dying, an old woman, and one of my granddaughters was being born at the same time. So my daughter was having her first child and this friend was dying. And in that, I saw that death is birth and birth is death. So I wrote that I was sitting there and I'm seeing this woman leaving a world that she had known, and this child coming into a world unknown, and the two are one, they're one and the same. So I kind of write from those moments, maybe like you, that I experienced something and I try to put it. I said maybe one day I'll get my stuff published. But actually, we have a poet here called Eula Bod, and she published 3 of my poems in her book some time ago in 2009 or somewhere there. And I gave her 3 of my poems and she published it. So I do have some work done, but I really enjoyed your presentation. I identified with a lot of your stuff. And somehow the whole childbearing, I brought 5 children into the world. I understand that womb, the water, the whole thing of life as sacred. So thank you very much. Thank you, Alison, for inviting me to this forum. It feeds my soul at this time. My husband is ill, and these are moments of life. In the midst of all the pain and suffering, there is life. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm seeing Dr. Casti made a comment. I don't know if he wants to come on and repeat it, Tom.
Sure. I come from a rural area of Long Island, which no longer really exists. And it's been bought and sold by billionaires. So when I was listening to Nancy's poetry, it really struck home for me in a way. And so I wondered, you mentioned climate change is eating away Bermuda, and I understand there's some islands in Bermuda that no longer exist. But it's not just climate change that's taking away islands. And I don't know about Bermuda, but does Bermuda of your poem still exists, do you feel?
I would say that there's a ferocity there in nature that still persists. The saying is that Bermuda architecture is put up a building and just plant a banana tree in front of it, meaning nature will take over. But I do hear what you're saying in terms of the change that happens to these islands because of development. And I can even speak to that from where I live now in Washington, Connecticut, which is, known to be bucolic, but as of the COVID situation, many New Yorkers have exited and come out here. And the hollow where I live in has all of a sudden, become a place for, new homes, and there's an infiltration. But going back to Bermuda, certainly it's changed since my childhood. But I would say the beauty of the island is still there, and the nature of the Bermudian character is still there. It's always a question, the poem that I read, Home, Home, it's always a question of, whether or not an islander would go back to die like elephants going back to their place to die. And there's always something in islanders that's calling them back, and in dialect or dialogue with them, that's a major decision, not to go back to die. So there's still a strong pull towards the island, say from a Bermudian, even though, yes, definitely it's changed. It's very different. And I really appreciate that things have changed for you, from Long Island. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask Dr. Jota, she has also any just last comments. I was so struck by the phrase, truth is clear as a cannibal's smile, for example. Yes. So with that kind of truth, is there any insight you want to offer to us before we close down? Because our time is gone. It was so swift. You were both so wonderful.
No, I don't have any.
You don't have any help.
But to clarify about that line, there were of course these ideas that where Joyce Heth would be coming from, or from a culture of cannibals, right? But in many ways, she was actually being cannibalized, like in this kind of voracious desire for her body to be displayed, for her, the fact that she there was an open dissection, a public dissection of her. And so the proof in who is the real cannibal, is in, what actually comes to pass in her life and after her death. And so I think there could be some general thing about that, as we're having questions about the environment, whether or not places in our sea-lined homes can remain because of greed that impacts the environment. The questions of like who and what is doing that damage, or kind of come to bear.
I'm going to say I may be unfair in characterizing the capitalists as being the cannibals, but you'll look at the evidence. If our beauty disappears, then we know what happened. I was just going to point out that this monument by Michelle Broder, called Mothers of Gynecology, a tribute to Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy, who were three of the women experimented on by J. Marion Sims, is a new creation in Alabama. And I was just going to compare it to this is the Marion Sims Monument in South Carolina, because he was born in South Carolina, but he worked in Alabama and in New York City and in France, where he was the gynecologist to empresses. But there is no mention of the contributions of the women who made his work possible. And that is a correction that we must put back into the record. And so I'm going to thank Dr. Thomas Cassidy, who's professor of English in the Department of English and Communications at South Carolina State. And of course, Dr. Allison McCletchie, assistant professor of sociology and Department of Social Sciences, for their co-sponsorship of this program. And they form our production team, along with, of course, myself. And also, I'd like to thank all the faculty, staff, students, and the chair of the Department of English and Communications at South Carolina State. I think Dr. Hawes is here, and the sponsors of the Twigs Rose Festival. I have to go back and show the South Carolina Humanities because they are the funders that made this possible. And the School of Education, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and of course, the museum, South Carolina State University. And once again, the Twigs Rose Festival of the Arts. Thank you both, Nancy Ann Miller, Dr. Bettina Judd, for an extraordinary program. We're so grateful for your contributions and your wonderful work. And that concludes our program for today.